This is the Mainframe Connect podcast, brought to you by the Linux Foundation's Open Mainframe project. Mainframe Connect includes the I Am a Mainframer series, the riveting Mainframe Voices series, and other content exploring relevant topics with mainframe professionals and offering insights into the industry and technology. This episode is another in the I Am a Mainframer series exploring the career journeys of mainframe professionals.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Stephen Dickens, and you're joining us on another episode of the I'm a Mainframer podcast, brought to you by the Linux Foundation's Open Mainframe project. I'm joined today by Stephen Perva from Insono. Hey, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
Stephen. Thanks for having me. Really happy.
So this is going to get confusing. We're both called Stephen, so that, at least my English accent will help the viewers and listeners sort of differentiate. So let's dive straight in. Sure. Tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about who you are and who you work for.
Cool. Absolutely. Again, thanks for having me. I've always been a watcher and listener of the podcast.
You say all the right things.
Absolutely. So I'll go through my spiel. My name's Stephen Perva. Officially, I am the expert mainframe innovation engineer at a company called Insono. You've had my leader, Lisa Dyer, on the podcast before.
Fantastic. Love Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I basically work in the product organization for her in the mainframe line of business. So expert innovation engineer is kind of a fun title.
I like that. That's a good job.
What does that even mean? Yeah. So when I came in, I was the modernization engineer, but then we kind of got into this, you know, the industry well enough. We got into the machinations of like, what does modernization mean? And then it kind of became this game of tennis where it's like, oh, it's a good thing. It's a bad thing. It's a good thing. And I'm like, let's go with innovation. I think we can all agree that innovation is a good thing. So we've kind of ran with that.
It's interesting you mentioned that. And I mean, we'll sidecar into it for a moment. I was having this debate with one of the vendors about how charged that modernization term is. Mm-hmm. So we'll just digress and go there for a moment.
Sure.
It's interesting. You say mainframe modernization. And my perception is that means very different things to very different vendors.
Right.
If I was talking, and I talk to the AWS teams and the Google teams and the Microsoft teams and some of the vendors that can help people migrate off the mainframe, right. The Heirloom Computings, the Astadias, the Verisources, the Blue Ages of this world. They would see mainframe modernization as modernizing off the platform.
Right.
You then look at some of the open source projects in the Open Mainframe project. You look at some of the work, the great work that IBM's doing, that BMC's doing, that Broadcom's doing, that Rocket Software's doing, and a whole plethora of others. They would see that modernization term as how do you create a microservices version of a COBOL application that still runs on the mainframe.
Right.
So it really is distressing for me that what I think is a genuine term, mainframe modernization, as you say, gets into this political battle of do you mean modernize on or off?
Right.
The likes of Kyndryl and Insono, I think, have probably the most evolved view of that.
Yeah.
As it can mean both. And I certainly know Lisa and Oliver sort of Pressland on your team.
Right. Yep. Yeah,
hold what I think is one of the most evolved views in the market, if it can mean all of the above. On, off, with, you know, API frameworks, the whole sort of shooting match. So it's fascinating that you say that. Do you think, am I seeing it right? Is that how you see it?
So I would say that aligns with my perspective. And I've always felt like there's really kind of some mainframe tribalism that we have, right? I've been in the industry for at least 15 years now, believe that or not. And there's a lot of people that say the mainframe, the platform is as modern as it can be, you know, like we're chomping at the heels of quantum. We're talking about crypto from like end to end at rest and in flight, et cetera, et cetera. And that's engineering, and that the hardware platform, it's indisputable that that's modern. That's the definition of modern for enterprise computing, right? But then you start to reflect on some of the environments that people work on. I tend to be a ZOS specialist. Like that's where I came up from, and that's what I've been working on for the past decade and a half now. And when you look at that, you really find it hard to be like, this is modern, right? It's like someone asked me the other day, oh, what do you think is going to happen when ZOS, let's just say 4.0 comes out? I'm like, probably look a whole lot like ZOS 1.12 did when I started, right? Like when you log on, it kind of looks the same. It's just about leveraging that hardware. So I think modernization from a perspective, at least from my perspective, is getting the software and the user experience, the developer experience, and the infrastructure administration experience to start to match up with what people experience on other platforms. And I agree with you. I think the Insono ethos about it all is spot on, and it's why I align myself really well with that. And I think that they like me because I'm in that sphere of mentality with them, right?
So the show's called I'm a Mainframer. We'd like to sort of get a view of you. You mentioned you've been on the platform sort of 15 years. Give me that kind of genesis story. How did you get onto the platform? What did those early days look like? And just sort of paint the picture for me as you go through, and we'll use that as the next segment.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of 2x speed kind of my origin story into technology, right? So
for those watching on sort of podcast, this is maybe the point to slow it down.
Yeah.
Speed wise, he's going to go fast.
So my dad he worked for a company called Hardee's. I'm sure, anybody who's anybody, at least in the United States, is probably familiar with Hardee's, right? Became Carl's Jr., the whole, franchise chain of fast food burgers, right? So he worked for Hardee's as like a manager at the restaurant. And then he became part of like the point of sale system team, and he would travel around the Midwest. I'm from Chicago. So he would travel around the Midwest and he would fix point of sale systems. And as a way, because he was always driving several hours at a time, and as a way to keep himself from like falling asleep at the wheel, he would bring me along with him so I could talk to him, right? And he would drag me along and I would watch him run cables. I would watch him like replace solder chips onto boards. So this is like traditional computing from like what I would consider now the Stone Age, right? Mm-hmm. And he would drag me along, and it was a way that he and I bonded. And from there, I got into gaming and networking systems together. And I was a rebellious teenager, naturally, caused a little bit of trouble. And as part of my punishment, my dad was like, you're good with computers. You have to donate your time to this school and you have to work on their network, right? And they just had like an IPX network with a bunch of Windows systems and all that. And so I would fix kind of their printer problems, image their Windows systems. I think they had Windows 95 perhaps at the time, something like that. So I did that work, started my own business in this farm town where I grew up, and I just did networking and software installs, removal of viruses, all the tech support stuff, I suppose you could call it. Told my parents that I was going to live in their basement forever, right? I was like, this is my job. This is what I want to do. I'm getting paid. I'm loving it. And my parents were like, no, you're not. You're going to get a real job, or you're going to, go to college. And so I was like, well, I don't really want to go work somewhere else because I needed a degree. Such were the times, right? So I moved on I went to college. I went to Northern Illinois University. I don't know how familiar you are with them, but they have a pretty decent program that has some cohesion with the mainframe. So they did COBOL and high-level assembler as part of their curriculum. I learned those things. All throughout high school, I was always told by one of my teachers, if you're not prepared for class, do not show up, right? So the temperature of the school was everyone was talking about the Master the Mainframe program, if you remember that program.
Yep.
And I was super late for class, and I was like, well, I'm not prepared. I'm not going to show up. Just happened to coincide with the day that the Master the Mainframe program was kicking off, that whole contest. So I went to the computer lab back when we had computer labs, and I started working on the Master the Mainframe thing. I kind of breezed through it. I felt like I was kind of enjoying that whole process, and I wanted to get like a gift card and get my resume into the database. That was some of the early prizes. So I accomplished all that. Went back to my dorm, and I was like, I'm not going to finish the other bits. I was like, I don't really want a TV or a computer. Those are like, or to go to what I called at the time, Poughkeepsie, New York, right? Like I'd never heard of it. And that was like the grand prize, right? Was to go there. But I didn't understand like the whole big blue, and all of like what that all meant. So I was like, yeah, I don't want to do anything with that. And sure enough, so I stopped. I was one of the first people to finish like the first two parts. I got the gift card. I got my my resume into a database. Next thing I knew, someone from IBM sends me an email and they said, "Hey, love to talk with you. Going to give you a call," because my name and everything was in this database. So they called me on my phone. I have a flip phone at the time, right? And they said, "Oh, we want you to come work at Poughkeepsie, New York." And I was like, I thought it was a scam. I thought for sure it was someone trying to like get my social security number or something. And so I'm playing along. I'm like, "Oh yeah, great. Sounds fun. Send me an email." And then I'm like, "I'll talk to you later," basically. And this was somebody who would soon become my manager when I worked for IBM. Turned out it was legitimate. They sent me an offer letter and I ended up, the place that I didn't want to go to, Poughkeepsie, New York, that we all know now is Poughkeepsie.
15 miles south of me, so I know it well.
So the next thing I know, I'm packing up my whole life and I'm leaving small town Illinois and I'm moving to Poughkeepsie, New York to be a systems programmer supporting the engineering system test floor. So I did that for a handful of years, had a tremendous fear of flying, and I ended up moving back to Illinois, worked for a private company in the Chicagoland area so I could be closer to my family. Been here ever since.
Oh, that's great. So where did you live when you were based in Poughkeepsie?
So I started living in Fishkill, New York, and then I moved to Wappingers Falls. But yeah, I was in building, I can tell you, I don't know, I think it's building 1. Whatever the big engineering system test floor is on, I think it's building 1. Facing the clock building, 1 building to the left of it.
I know it well. I spent 10 years working for IBM and 7 of those based in Poughkeepsie, so I know it really well. I was in 707.
Okay.
We're going down a rabbit hole quick. So great early part of the story. Tell me about the move to Insono, kind of what that involved, and then we'll get into a little bit more detail on Insono and kind of that type of piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was working at this private company in the Chicagoland area, it was much like most mainframe environments might be today. It was a skeleton crew of a bunch of folks, well, a handful of folks who did pretty much everything. So I did ZOS systems programming, I did networking, we did the hardware roll-ins and outs of the actual CPCs themselves, which are the physical, I don't have to tell you that, but the physical mainframes themselves, right? And so I did a lot of firewall infrastructure there. I did some COBOL development while I was there, DB2, Kix, the whole bag of tools, right? So I got to learn pretty much anything and everything. And then my journey with that company kind of came to an end because there was really no technical growth trajectory for me. So I decided that I would kind of part ways, and, COVID happened and I had a family. I started a family and I wanted to be home more. So here I am working remote now. I was seeking out like a remote job as everyone was doing their kind of RTO stuff, the return to office. And I was like, I'm going to stay home. I was like, I really like being close to my family, having lunch with my wife and my daughter. And so I'm going to try to find something that's a full-time remote gig. Insono was there. I applied for 2 roles, one operational and one was in the newly founded product engineering team. And the product engineering team got back to me first. I told the other side of the company saying, "Hey, like I have this interview with the engineering team." And they're like, "Tell us how that goes. And if anything, falls through, come talk to us there." And they snatched me up first because I was so ambidextrous, I think. And it's just been a joy for me to work at Insono since then. I've been almost 4 years now.
Yeah, I've spent quite a lot of time with Lisa I think I touched on it. I think you guys have got a genuinely good, balanced perspective that meets clients where they are, right, with regard to modernization and how best to think about the platform. So I'm not surprised. So one of the things that was interesting as I was doing the prep coming towards this call was some of the things you've been doing for the project. I'm not on Discord.
Okay.
So maybe I'm a proxy from where sort of some of the audience is. What are you doing for the project? What is that starting to lead to? And really, how are you supporting the Open Mainframe project with some of the efforts? We'd not come across each other. Back in the day, I founded this project and approached the LF. So I kind of been involved in it but when I saw the background and we were sort of got the prep from the producer, I was like, oh, I've not spoken to Steve and I'm really interested. So just maybe sort of, if you will, talk me through it. What are you doing? How's that going? What kind of the impact? And we'll spend a few minutes there.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah. So I always tell people I do a lot of really what I call wacky stuff, right? Just one look at me, one look at all the stuff behind me. You're like, this guy is like out there. He's doing, some strange things, right? So I started, this all kind of kicked off when I got to Insono. I got to like witness that ethos that we've been talking about, where they kind of see it as like an integral overall holistic IT strategy, as opposed to just kind of this like tribalism, siloed experience. So I was like, this is really amazing. I was like, that's my background through and through. Like, I'm a networking guy. I ran LAN parties when I was a kid. Like, I did it all. And I was like, I want to kind of build more of this ecosystem out. And for me, like witnessing kind of InfoSec culture was kind of the impetus I needed to kind of say, I would love to make like a mainframe or start pushing towards a mainframe culture that mimics the good things about the InfoSec culture. There's a lot of kind of this and that about the InfoSec culture, but one thing about them is the good things that they do are very strong. It's a really strong identity, a lot of cohesion amongst people in that industry. And I was like, I'd like to create that for the mainframe. So I started this Discord community. Me and a couple other friends of mine, we started it, and they kind of faded away because they found other things that were enjoyable. It started just the three of us. So I started inviting people. Next thing I know, there was 50 people. I thought I had, changed the world. I'm like, there's 50 mainframers. We're talking about mainframe stuff. I go to every conference. I do technical talks about whatever things, Ansible, Python, all of the different stuff that I find interesting. And at the end of my slide deck, I would always say, love for you to join us on Discord. Next thing you know, 175 people, 275 people, 1,000 people, right? And by the time...
So how many people are in the Discord group now? So, I'm genuinely surprised.
There are over 2,600 people that hop on the Discord right now. And it's an amazing community. I cannot say thank you enough to the people that swing by there and talk, right? It really kind of... People always like to kind of compare and contrast it with like the old IBM main community, which was the listserv that people did. This is kind of that, but like a new evolution.
Just
the next
iteration. New tools, right? I mean, Discord's a new platform, a new way to engage.
Yeah.
I was expecting you to say under 1,000. I've got to admit.
I'm cool with that. And I think that we've grown a lot recently. And I think you see that like people are resonating. It's starting to really become... I've always told people that like we live in this world where everything has an identity. We talk about like infrastructure as a service, this is that. I always say like we live in a world where everything is an identity. So if you're somebody who drives like a Mustang, like Mustang is your identity, right? Or if you're someone who is in InfoSec, InfoSec is who you are. I feel like this kind of really helps people kind of tap into the mainframe community in a way that they can make that a core component of who they are in a good way. In my opinion, right?
Almost to the point where I think we should create a podcast show called I'm a Mainframer.
Absolutely. It could be a thing. It could take off.
It could be a thing. I mean, maybe they'd get this crazy British guy to do it and we'd run a podcast for 6 or 7 years. But no, I mean, Stephen, we joke, but I genuinely do believe I've been going to share the conference for years. I'm going in February. If you are, we should meet. Yeah. But I genuinely believe there's the technology, there's the stack, there's the software, there's the hardware, there's various companies, there's various vendors. But I genuinely believe that the mainframe community is exactly that, a community.
Yeah.
The people I've had on this show, the conversations I've had, the way the dynamic works, the fact that Share is the largest open source community and the longest running open source community. When I heard that, and we did the work as the Open Mainframe project to kind of amplify that work that Share's been doing, kind of speaks to it for me. And the community will support and engage. Right. So I say I'm surprised, but then again, maybe I'm not surprised about how successful. So what are the types of conversations that are going on the Discord? How are people using it? Maybe I'm a system programmer listening to this podcast. I work at, I don't know, Wells Fargo or Citi, or I'm in the government and I want to, I'm maybe on the end user side and not on the vendor side.
Yeah.
How are people using the Discord?
So So that's a great question, and I think that a few things that I'd like to tap on. And I did write an article for the Shared Intelligence, I think is their publication that they do. I think I did one on the Discord. So if you're in that community, anybody
We'll get the
listening,
link in the show
yeah,
notes, and we'll put a link to that.
Plug into that. But kind of the cliff notes about all of that is that it's really a space for people to kind of, we always say, come as you are. There's no such thing as like a foolish question. If I've kind of reflected on some of the other communities that I've witnessed in the mainframe space, sometimes there's a, well, did you search first? And that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, right? And I was always said like, okay, here we are talking about like a piece of technology that was a core component of the mainframe in 1986. It's 2025 now. It's okay for me to ask about it again, because maybe something between now and 1986 has changed. And someone could say, yeah, we used to do it this way, but this is how we do it. So we invite systems programmers, developers, anybody who's even enthusiastic. It's the System Z enthusiast Discord. So maybe you're retired, or maybe you're just curious about what it is. We've had people pop on to say, hey, I just found out about mainframes. I started searching. I saw this Discord community, figured I'd pop in. And like you have just illustrated, the community jumps in. Like, if you have any questions, come talk to us. And it's moderated so that you can't just have kind of that like trolling attitude or the negativity or elitism that comes to it. We have volunteer moderators. So I kind of run the thing, and the volunteer moderators, big thank you to all of them for the work that they do to make sure that nobody's, bringing negativity to the table, or, sending the conversation into a space where it doesn't feel like a welcome one. But yeah, so we're talking about like, how do I automate this? How would I write this in Rex? What are the latest open tools? So we talk about Zoe there. We talk about the Z Open community, all of that amazing stuff. We give feedback. We even have vendors who pop on and they'll take ideas from the community. We run live events, stage events that we'll run. We've been doing them once a month. We call it the Z Rebels Technical Water Cooler, where it's basically kind of a round table of mainframers. We'll have 50 to 75 people come live like you and I are right now, sitting in a video chat. We bring people on stage, they raise their hand, they'll say, hey, I'm a new systems programmer. Does it get easier? Or how do I ever understand this behemoth of an operating system? And the community just rises up, right? And they say, don't worry, you're going to be okay. We were all there and we're all still there. So it's just an amazing place.
That's how the community operates. I think this is, maybe it's one of the most daunting technologies.
Right.
And I think that factors into how the community is probably the most welcoming. You look at something like Linux, it's probably easier to get started. It's probably easier to kind of download something and put it on a Raspberry Pi or your desktop. So the barrier to getting in is easy. But I'd say the community's not as welcoming. I'd say the mainframe community's flipped. It's harder to get onto this platform, but once you've declared that you're interested, the community's a lot more welcoming. So I'm kind of not surprised by the dynamic you described.
Yeah. I look back on it all the time, and I would tell you that probably in the last 3 months, I've probably spoken to people like yourself, and I've said, I'm very proud of this community. It is like a feather in my cap, something that I feel like I've done that I can reflect on and say, yeah, I've kind of made a difference here. Right. Yeah. And I get messages all the time, people saying like, this is such a cool component of my day. If I'm ever puzzled about something, I can come in, I can pop a question on there. I'm not going to get chastised for it. I'm going to get a lot of interesting feedback, and you're right. I think that the people really bring the personality to the table. And I think we all know, because we're all have been there and we're all actually there right now. So it's a good space to get kind of that engagement from people and feel like people want to help.
Well, we'll certainly put the link to the Discord in the show notes. I'll speak to the producer. We'll do that. If you ever want an analyst to come on to one of your shows, I'm more than happy to reciprocate.
Absolutely.
For me, this is how I give back to the Open Mainframe project and the community as a whole. This is my give back. I'm not a coder. I'm not a sysprog. I've got some things I'm good at that I bring to the platform, and I'm happy to share my time. But as we start to wrap up here, there's always a couple of questions I ask the guests, and we consistently ask these. We talked about your kind of journey. What would you go back to Stephen's sort of 21, 22, graduating college? We have a lot of younger listeners to this show, people who are kind of maybe at that age, maybe they've gone through whatever the new version of the Master the Mainframe program is, and they're starting to think about a career. What would you go back to your younger self and give yourself as advice?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I'm partially prepared to answer.
If you've ever watched the show, you know I ask it every episode.
Yeah. So I kind of saw this one coming. I think that I would say to myself, there's the technical aptitude of a career, and then there's kind of the charismatic, personable aptitude of the career, right? Exactly. And those two things can be just as important as one another oftentimes, right? When I started, I was really focused on, I'm going to kind of just sit in my little corner. I'm going to be my technical genius, and I'm going to hope people witness what I'm good at, right? But if I could give myself advice, as you're asking, I would say no good product really sells based on merits alone. There is some marketing that has to exist. So use your voice, speak about what you're good at, volunteer for opportunities that you think you can smash out of the park. And if I could do that, I feel like my career would probably, hopefully, be in a better place than it is now. Not to say that I don't have an amazing career, but like I feel like it could be even better. So
that's
just
really, really great advice. I describe it as, and I was literally just having this conversation this morning, knowledge plus reach equals eminence.
That's great.
You can be really vocal on social media platforms and not say anything of any weight, and you'll get reach.
Mm-hmm.
You can be super knowledgeable and be an expert but not speak to anybody. You put the two together, knowledge plus reach equals what I describe as eminence.
Mm-hmm.
How do you build eminence in a community as that trusted voice that people go to? It's got to be knowledge plus reach.
Yeah.
So 100% agree. Well, my final question that I always ask, and I'm genuinely interested to get your opinion here. We're looking at the platform. It's going to be a big year for the mainframe. Looking out, so not talking about the next product or the next release or the next thing, but taking maybe a 5-year time horizon.
Sure.
You're looking into that crystal ball. The mist is starting to clear. Where do you see the mainframe going forward?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing like this huge surgence of like what I always say is just integration, right? Mm-hmm. I think the future of the platform is starting. We've all called it hybrid cloud for how long now?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm starting to call it integration. Right. And I think that that's a number of components. People are starting to realize the criticality of the data on the platform. They're starting to realize how cohesive their IT strategy at large needs to be. And then they're starting to say, how do I solve this integration problem? We're seeing a lot of people talk about DevOps, and there's a lot of movement around DevOps. And then you're seeing open source projects start to really fold into that integration story. So 5 years from now, I suspect the community will still be as strong as ever, if not stronger. We'll be collaborating in different ways. We'll be talking about new tools. We'll be talking a lot more about open source tools. And I think the focus of the conversation is going to be on how do I integrate my mainframe with the overall IT ecosystem that I have at my enterprise. And people won't be seeing it as kind of like this monolith that they want to leave in the corner. And they're going to say, this is critical to my strategy. Let's integrate now. It's not going to be like, well, how do we integrate? It's going to be let's move quicker. We got to get in there and get that data and do something meaningful with it. I think a lot of people would want me to talk about AI and machine learning and all that. I think that all kind of falls after integration for us. And I think we'll definitely get there. And that's what I see. More open source, more integration, and the collaboration between systems programmers will be focused on those two things.
Well, Stephen, I think I tend to agree. I think we're on that trajectory. This has been a fascinating conversation. You've been listening to Stephen Perva from Insono. My name's Stephen Dickens. I'm your host, as always. Please click and subscribe and do all the things that help us on the algorithm as we try and grow the show. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mainframe Connect podcast and this episode in the I Am a Mainframer series. Liked what you heard? Subscribe to get every episode. Or watch us online at openmainframeproject.org. Until next time, this is the Mainframe Connect podcast.